now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Jacob and Nelson podcast. Today's topic of our conversation is the power of perspective. And here is Jacob and Nelson.
Hello, it's good to see you.
Dude, it's been too long, brother.
I know I think it's been 3 weeks since we actually not last texted, but since we texted and we said we were going to sort of land on this topic and see where it takes us. And then, due to I think complications of schedules and conflicts, here we are 3 weeks later, and I'm ready to get the conversation rolling.
Dude, I was just telling you earlier that I just came back from Ohio today. I had this bright idea to take the train to Ohio because I had a last minute show, and I didn't feel like driving 8 hours there, so I decided to take the train, which is going to take 16 hours, right? Duh. And on the train, I on the way back, I'm thinking to myself, I am so tired. I am so tired, but I made a promise to Jacob to do this podcast today, so here I am, man. Thank you for doing this with me. I appreciate you, brother.
Well, I appreciate you pushing through the exhaustion. I know how easy and how tempting it could be to just shoot off a text and say, "Well, we'll get it next week." But I feel like we've done that now for both of us have been guilty of this. Where I've did it. I think I was one week and you were the other week. And if we keep on kicking the can down the road,
Hmm.
it becomes easier and easier not to have get together and have these conversations. And we even talked a little bit just about last time, how this is not really natural for either one of us, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
We're both out of our comfort zone here, and I'm going to put myself out here right from the beginning,
Go
where
ahead.
if I had seen that text from you tonight that says, "Hey, let's hit this next week," I would have almost had a sense of relief, a small sense of a small sense of relief in that, but then once we get into it, it does feel natural, it feels good. But because this is so far outside of the zone of where I'm comfortable,
Yeah.
and as much as I enjoy these conversations, I'm so glad that we are doing this. I truly am. I'm not saying that just because we're live and we're currently doing it now, but that feeling that you'll get sometimes where it's
I
like,
do.
man, I'm kind of excited about something, but man, if it got canceled, I would feel kind of badly about it, but I would also be somewhat relieved, and then I would look
Yeah.
forward to it when it got rescheduled. And so,
And then we
um,
reschedule that one too.
and then we would reschedule that one, right? And so,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it definitely takes a force. Once we get these conversations going,
Hmm.
it instantly clicks, I think, and it does feel right almost immediately. But it's like the lead up to it where it's just like, I have
Yeah.
that sort of healthy trepidation of, I just, what are we going to say,
That is so true. And before we continue, I want to get better at this because, like you said, we're not really good at this. We're trying to get better, and I believe we have important things to say about life in general, and to share with our circles of influence. That I feel it behooves us to say this in the beginning. So, if you're watching this right now on Facebook, whether it's my personal page or the Jacob and Nelson podcast Facebook page, please, please, please make sure you drop a like and drop a comment as we're talking about the power of perspective. If you have questions, if you have suggestions, if you have your 2 cents, drop it in the comment section and we'll pin it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to pin one right now. Look who just said hi. Rick Sager. What's going on, Rick? Rick goes to Central with us, and well, he goes to Central Christian Assembly. Thank you so much, Rick, for joining in today. So, yes, drop your comments, drop your likes, and please share. The more you share this content, the more people can see this. We'll greatly appreciate that. So, today's topic is the power of perspective. I kind of suggested this based off how our last three conversations have gone so far, and how even though you and I we can converse very comfortably, it's funny how we sometimes see things from two different perspectives. The same thing we see from two different perspectives. Do you want to elaborate on that before I continue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's completely, perfectly natural. I mean, no two human beings are like, even identical twins are going to have somewhat skewed perspectives about how they view and they go through life. Although they share obviously identical DNA, their perspectives on things are going to shift and shape and change as they sort of go through life. And so it's no surprise that a Nigerian immigrant to the United States has different perspectives from somebody who was born in the United States and has never left the country, right? I don't have a
You've never
passport.
left?
Never left the country. I don't
Oh,
even
wow.
possess a passport. And so it's definitely a goal of mine that I definitely want to travel at some point, but I've yet to do that. And so it would be strange if you and I converged on every single perspective and we saw life identically. It would be strange and it would actually kind of be a little boring probably, right? And so I
I
think
agree.
having these types of interactions, even though we've only done 3 so far, they've been incredibly interesting for me. I've just in the 3 that we've done, I've grown in terms of the way I view certain things, and view
I'm
certain
curious to
things.
find out how have you grown, like, and what particular topics. I feel like I have an idea, but I want you to be the one to say, what have we talked about in the past that has made you kind of contemplate your perspective moving forward?
So it was the second podcast that we did, when our initial conversation was going to be about cancel culture. And my sort of definition of what cancel culture was and what we ended up talking about were completely different things. We sort of, I think, for the first 10 or 15 minutes or so, we sort of stuck to the traditional, what everybody, at least what I thought everybody was talking about. Cancel culture was trending in the news, trending all over media. And it was sort of just basically being deplatformed for having an opinion that the collective masses found reprehensible. And again, it was a sort of a self-appointed collective group of people whose rule book and set of rules shifted and changed as the day went about, and you never knew what the set of rules were. But we quickly sort of started talking about just Black Lives Matter and protests versus riots, and it's easy for someone like me to look at the destruction, I guess, that's going on and think, well, that's absolutely unacceptable and just incomprehensible. Okay. And while I do still think it's unacceptable, I now at least understand the mentality that got to that point. You explained something to me that was very eye-opening, where it was just
Yeah.
how in the African American community the value of property and the value
Life.
of property in general is not weighted as high, and so to destroy the property of something doesn't mean as much in that type of community as it does in other types of community. And so so I say it was interesting and sort of eye-opening to me from that point of view. Now, I do still think perhaps you and I have disagreement with respect to the acceptability of the destruction of property that's going on. However,
I don't think we do. I don't think we do per se. I mean, I don't know exactly what you believe with regards to destruction of property, but there is nowhere within my my realm of acceptability when it comes to protest that I think that destruction of property is okay. That I think that looting is okay. I just understand looting and destruction of property as a symptom of an oppressed people, as a symptom of a protest gone wrong, as a symptom of protest not being listened to or addressed. So, if in as much, it's almost like saying, I don't agree with my brother's dog barking every time I come over to my brother's house, but it's his nature to bark, So it's like you can't control this. You can't control the outcome of a particular set of circumstances because it's just a natural ebb and flow. But it doesn't mean I condone the looting or the destruction. I just think it's a natural symptom of an oppressed society.
Yeah, and I don't. I guess I didn't think that you condoned it, but
Okay,
it seemed like you had more of a posture of being insouciant toward that type of behavior than I would have,
I see.
and um, and so where I look at it, and I immediately think you're destroying your own neighborhoods.
Mm,
You're basically chopping your own selves off at your own knees. You say you want a better community, you say you want better this and or that, but
mhm,
you're burning down your own neighborhoods. And so I guess the thing that was eye opening to me, that just at least gave me an alternate perspective, or at least a more clear perspective, was understanding that mentality. And then that led us
mhm,
to a conversation where we spoke about good diversity and bad diversity,
mhm.
and how the exchange of diversified ideas should be had at a table where we're living in a society where we're trying to implement those ideas as
Yeah,
best as we possibly can, as optimally as we possibly can for the people who live in those societies. And the point that you brought up that was so obvious, but I had just overlooked it for all those years, was that the African American community hadn't had a seat at that table to
yeah,
have those initial conversations, to see what was implementable and what wasn't, what was
yeah.
acceptable and what wasn't. And so, again, that's why I wasn't saying that we disagree
Oh, I see. I see. I
from the
get you.
standpoint of that you're all for it and I'm completely against it. We viewed it through two different lenses,
Yeah.
and we were able to arrive at what seemed to be common ground.
Hmm.
And but we arrived at those common grounds from very, very different points of view, and so that was really cool.
But the beauty about that destination point that we both came to was the platform of civility. And by the way, everyone watching this right now, don't be shy. Please don't be shy. Go ahead, smash the like button, smash the share button, and go on YouTube right now and click subscribe on our YouTube page. We're gonna have content coming to you. We promise you every week. All right, every week.
That's
But
a
anyway,
bold
go.
promise.
That's a bold promise, one we intend to keep. So help us God. but the thing I really loved about how we arrived at that destination, where we both had different vantage points looking at the same thing, but we arrived at a civil compromise, for lack of a better word. It was there was a platform of civility. I wasn't shouting over you. I listened to what you had to say, and you listened to what I had to say. And I think that's what's getting lost in today's day and age, where people were just shouting at each other and we're not really listening. We're not allowing people to finish their thoughts and taking the time to really understand what they are saying, because we automatically assume that anyone that disagrees with our perspectives must be bad, evil, left, right, whatever you want to call them. And whereas I feel like most people will have a common ground within which we can all exist, but we tend to not allow that space, that civility space for us to have these kinds of conversations. So I like that. I mean, even if we're not arrived to the same kind of, compromise, and we still chose to disagree, but as long as we got there civilly, without insulting each other, I feel like that's healthy too. And I know that was one of our main things we were hoping to get out of this podcast, is to have two dudes with two different perspectives on one platform. And sometimes we will agree, and sometimes we will disagree. And I would hope to show my circle of influence how I like to converse with my world without being brash or rude or, you know.
Yep. Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yeah, I did. I liked how that was the one too where, and I apologize to anybody who goes back and listens to that one now, because that one was the content of that one, I think, and the conversation of that one was really good. The
yeah.
audio quality was terrible, and we've made this, or if we haven't made this clear, let's make this clear now. Neither one of us are experts in this field of podcasting or streaming or broadcasting or anything else. And so we are learning on the fly, right? So the very first one that we did, it was about as raw and green and just gritty as it can possibly get. And we didn't learn very much from the first one. The second one, we sort of had a post-mortem where we went back and said, it's salvageable, but man, it's not great. And then the third one, I think, was incrementally better in terms of just quality and streaming ability. And so this is our fourth one. We're in a very incipient phase right now. And it's important, I think, for everybody to know that we are going to only get better and better, I hope, right? I think the two of us, I think, are, from what I know about you, you and I seem to both be kind of perfectionists. So I think that level of neuroticism is going to be good to a certain extent.
Well, yeah, I agree with everything you said. Maybe except for the neuroticism part. I like the experience for everyone. As a musician, I love giving the audience a really pleasant experience. And bad audio it's just so annoying to me. And so I have taken the time on my end, because I'm more of the social media savvy between the both of us, because I live in this space for my music. So I've taken the time to get this overlay, as you see right now. I've taken the time to figure out how to stream this to Facebook and to YouTube. But we still welcome your comments. We still welcome your feedback on how we can improve this platform, and maybe some topics that we're not thinking about that you might want us to converse about, and see how we converse about that topic, whether it be religion, philosophy, politics, or whatever. It doesn't matter. I would love to have those conversations. But going back to our original topic, the power of perspective. We had talked about the Black Lives Matter movement, and how it's sometimes, I feel, it's been perceived in certain circles as anti-establishment and anti maybe police, and I don't believe it to be the case. I believe it to be, and you can tell me what you believe about that, but I just find it fascinating that I thought it was common sense, but apparently it's not common. So let me explain my point of view with regards to Black Lives Matter. Now, I haven't taken the time to research Black Lives Matter in terms of their mission statement and all that stuff, but my belief is that Black Lives Matter is basically saying an oppressed group of people is coming to the forefront to say, hey, our lives matter just as much as everyone else. And the circumstances surrounding us has suggested to us that our lives do not matter as much. We don't get the same processes when it comes to education. We don't get the same process when it comes to access to resources. We don't get the same processes when it comes to justice. We don't get the same processes when it comes to policing and so on and so forth. So we're coming to the forefront to say, hey, you have to address us now. We're going to protest, and we're talking about the protesting going into looting. It's not the messaging of the Black Lives Matter. It's individuals within that movement that seek to stray, which is very common in any kind of protest you have. So that is my impression of the Black Lives Matter movement. What is yours?
Well, just to seize on a piece that you brought up about them not being anti-police, I mean, they certainly seem to be at the forefront of the hashtag defund the police movement. So to say that they are not anti-police, I think is antithetical to their message. And you go to their website, I mean, they have defund the police rhetoric on their website. And, you know,
Can you expand on defund the police for me? Because
yeah. So, and again, I'm not a Black Lives Matter member or anything like that. But again, the message I think that they're at least trying to portray as it relates to defund the police is they are presenting it in almost binary terms, where it's just Do we care about our education system, or do we want to continue pumping money into a police system that is violating our rights and abusing us on a day-to-day basis? And so when you frame it that way, yeah, the obvious answer is, well, no, we should pump more money into the education system and we should defund the police. But, so no neighborhood in this country is safer if tomorrow morning the police who would have previously patrolled those neighborhoods are now completely gone, and they're gone for good. And you now have no police in those neighborhoods ever, and the neighborhoods know it, and the people who surround those neighborhoods know it. And so, defund does not necessarily mean abolish, but that word defund is quickly becoming synonymized with abolish the police. And so you see this in
Is that their intention though with the word defund, or is it
so
more a
on
redistribution of?
so on July 6th, 2020, on the Black
Okay.
Lives Matter page, what defunding the police really means. Quote, "We know that police don't keep us safe. As long as we continue to pump money into our corrupt criminal justice system at the expense of housing, health, education investments, we will never truly be safe." So that's a sleight of hand move where they're saying, if we don't fund housing, health, and education investments, we're going to fund the police movements, and the police movements do X, Y, and Z. That's why we are calling to hashtag defund the police, hashtag invest in communities, and in our new video, Black Lives Matter Managing Director Kaylee Scales, and there's a video up that talks about that. And so that to me means that they want to reduce funding to the police department with the ultimate intent of abolishing police departments. And we saw how well that worked out in Seattle,
Yeah.
with Chop and Chaz, right? What happened there? For about 4 hours, it was
Chaos.
it was a utopia. For about 4 hours, it was this happy-go-lucky great place. But what did it ultimately lead to? They ultimately had segregated like lines where they basically said, this is a black area and you're not welcome, and we have white areas. They had murders, they had robberies, they had destruction of properties, they had all these things. And then they even had people within their organization or within that sort of chop zone who sort of acted as a quasi like law enforcement to try to keep the peace and keep the order. And so what emerged? What happened was chaos, and then the necessity for some type of law enforcement body emerged, and it ultimately was shut down. And so we see what happens with that. And so it's not a popular opinion to have to say that you shouldn't. Go ahead.
It sounds good on the surface, especially when when a society or a group of people have a history of abuse from the law enforcement. Not saying every law enforcement person is perpetuating this abuse, but I'm saying systemically and historically, there has been an abuse and a lack of trust between certain communities and the law enforcement. And then when you have, I feel, now let me backtrack a little bit. I was watching one of my favorite fighters talk about the whole Black Lives Matter movement and the where we find ourselves today with the very, very sensitive issues of race and politics and police and all that stuff. And he said we are all very guilty of reacting instead of responding. Right? A reaction is a knee jerk action to something that's happened. And sometimes you might say things like defund the police, but you don't understand what it means. You might even back a movement that says defund the police, but you don't know exactly what that means. Now, I don't profess to know what it means intimately, but I would think more if I had to use a phrase, I'll probably think more repair or reform the relationship between the police and those communities, because there's no trust. The trust is lost. So yes, if you redistributed the money and put more money into housing and education, but you didn't have people to police this housing, and this schools that you have your kids going to, then it's just as useless as it was before. You put all that money in there. So I think it's more of a response. And this herd mentality, the cancel culture we talked about earlier, is this same herd mentality where something happens, there's a reaction to that. That reaction trends, and everyone jumps on that trend. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
so there's something happens, there is a reaction to that, and then that reaction becomes a trend, and everyone jumps on that trend. And based on where you are in terms of your vantage point, you can pick whichever trend you want to associate yourself with.
But
And I
that's
feel
not
like
help. But that's not healthy.
it's not healthy. And I'm agreeing with you. I feel like people need to stop for a second, research for themselves, converse, and then make an informed decision moving
But
forward.
right. But the problem is that you have this Black Lives Matter movement, who,
Thanks, Anthony, by the way. Appreciate that.
yes, yeah, thank you very much for the comment. But you have this movement who isn't looking into what the ramifications, what future actions could possibly take place if you actually defund the police, what that means, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a cool and trendy and fun sounding hashtag that incites people to say absolutely, but they don't know what they're saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, I guess that's my biggest contention with it, is just because it sounds nice and
Mm-hmm.
because there has been a history of oppression and mistreatment from police communities to minority communities, right? That's a big chasm to jump across
I
from,
agree.
right? I mean, the Grand Canyon at its widest point is something like 18 miles, right?
I did
And
not know
so,
that.
so you're trying to go from one side of, okay, we've had our fair share of issues. There has been a fair share of mistreatment within the police department on one side of the Grand Canyon, and you're ignoring the 18 miles in between, and you're just saying, well, just burn the system to the ground
Yeah.
and start fresh. And so that, to me, it's not a healthy mentality. And again, like you said,
Yeah.
I don't think they have given the thought to, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to take money out of the police department's hands?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to have fewer police officers on the street? Is that a good thing or a bad thing, right?
Mm.
Nobody has sort of means tested what that actually looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's reactionary, it's knee
It's
jerk.
very, it's very reactionary. I agree. Sorry to cut you off, but I just wanted to chime in real quick, if you don't mind. We're getting some great interaction. Thank you all so much for your interaction. I'm just going to pin a couple of comments, and then we can speak to those comments, Jacob. Terrence said, I agree with you totally, Nelson. Appreciate your insights on Black Lives Matter. In my opinion, everyone matters. I think Jacob and I both agree that everyone matters. Black, brown,
Now, it's
Christian, Muslim, gay.
it's no surprise that Nelson chose the comment that agrees with him mostly, right?
No, if you,
The very
I
first comment you decide to pin is the
I
one
haven't
that
seen one
agrees
for
with.
you yet. I haven't seen
No,
one for you.
I'm kidding.
No, no, I know what you mean. But black, brown, Christian, Muslim, gay, straight, yeah. In any situation, I just believe that any group has a constitutional right, if they feel disenfranchised, if they feel like their voices are not being heard, to speak up and protest. And if they feel like their plight does not matter, or they're not being seen, they should by all means speak up. And we should all stop whatever we're doing and listen. Let me tag some more.
Well, can you
Go
put
ahead.
that one? Can you put that very first comment back up? So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, there's nothing in that statement that Terrence Taylor wrote, and I do appreciate the comment. There's nothing in that statement that is antithetical to what I have said, and so
I agree.
I agree with that. 100%.
Okay.
I'm just reading it through right now. Violence is not necessary. That's an interesting hashtag. Um, yeah, but when you have people who are affiliated with Black Lives Matter who are advocating for violence,
Hmm.
and that's a fact. Um, though it's
But
incumbent
it's
on,
not what the movement is, though.
but
It's
it's
just
incumbent. Okay, but it's incumbent on Black Lives Matter to say we're not affiliated with the violence that's going on. We're not affiliated with the protest that's going on. Similar to, and this was a point that I think we made in our politics conversation.
Mhm.
There are white supremacists who support Donald Trump, right?
Mhm.
It's incumbent on Donald Trump to say, I don't want your vote. I don't want your
He's not
support.
gonna say that.
No, no, no. I know that. No, no, no. I know that he's not going to say it. I know that he's not going to say it. But
Yeah.
it's incumbent on him to say, you guys are absolute pieces of garbage. What you
Mhm.
stand for is garbage, and I don't want your support. I would rather you vote for the other side and have them
Mm.
answer to the fact, because there's clearly something in his message that he is
Yes.
saying that resonates with white supremacists that say,
Yes.
I vote for him. So there's clearly something that the Black Lives Matter movement is doing that resonates with violence,
True.
that they think it's acceptable. That's the only. I'm trying to make an analogy. That's all.
Can I piggyback off that? Remember what I said in the last podcast we did when I said we have to be very patient, but also hold our leaders to accountability and responsibility, because when it's from the top down, we don't see that responsibility with your rhetoric from our leaders. Now, I would say leaders across the board. When we don't see a responsibility with our rhetoric from our leaders from the top down, from the top leaders, from the top establishments, from the top groups down, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's Trump, whether it's the RNC or the DNC, when we don't see that responsibility with the rhetoric, it's inevitable that the masses will follow suit with the irresponsibility of their rhetoric. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like, in as much as we can encourage our brothers and sisters to be aware of what they're espousing with their mouths and what they choose to put on their social media platforms, I feel we have to hold to greater responsibility the people we've elected to these offices, the people we trust with our dollars to speak on our behalf. We have to hold them to a greater responsibility to be responsible with their rhetoric, because if the president will not go up and say, I don't approve of that violence or behavior from this sector of people, but just kind of dance around the topic just to continue to get the votes and resonate with that base, then why should I? You
Yeah,
know?
but right, but in the same vein, so should an influential movement, as influential and as big and as
I
growing
agree.
as Black Lives Matter is. It's incumbent on Black Lives Matter to look at what's going on in Portland right now and say that is not what we stand for, right? Even it, and let's scale it back to just the two of us, right?
Okay.
Neither one of us have nearly the influence or the following that the president has, or that leaders have, or a movement like Black Lives Matter has.
Hmm.
But if I say anything on this podcast that a white supremacist finds appealing and says, specific to white supremacy or racism, and they say,
Hmm.
Jacob, what you just said there really sticks with me from a white supremacist movement, and I
Hmm.
support what you just said, I've failed, right? I have
Hmm.
failed. I don't want a white supremacist to comment on our feed and say, "Boy,
Yeah.
everything you just said makes sense. I agree with, and I support you from a ideological white supremacist perspective." Does that make sense, and is that fair?
I I'll say give yourself some slack. Reason being, you are responsible for what you put out. You're not responsible for how people perceive it, right? So, but
But
at the
I would
same,
immediately come out and say, absolutely not. Whoever that is,
true.
right?
You have the responsibility to do that. But when we're talking about the leaders like the Black Lives Matter movement, or whatever you want, whatever movement, Me Too movement, it's it's exhausting, and it's impossible to catch every single instance where someone takes the movement and ascribes some kind of ulterior motive to that movement that suits their own, biases or perspective, whatever the case may be. So, but I feel like in the case of, like, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, where defund the police. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know much about that phrase. I have to go do my research. I always thought it had to do with reform, but apparently it has more to do with moving actual dollars from police to something else, right? Am I wrong?
Well, so yeah, in the city of Portland, they want city council has already voted for this, where they want to abolish the police department. Now, the mayor, at least so
Really?
far, has taken a stand against that. But I mean, we're over 100 days, 100 consecutive days now in Portland, where there have been absolutely violent protests that have taken place.
Wow.
They've gone now to where the mayor, Ted Wheeler, I think is his name, the mayor of Portland, where he lives, his residence. It's a condo building, and they are camping out there, setting off fireworks there, just being absolutely, just completely destructive to his building where other people live. And so Ted Wheeler's response to this was, "Well, I'm going to move." So rather than
Address the situation. Yeah.
address the situation head on, I'm going to move. Now, to Ted Wheeler's credit, and this was several months ago, he was in the middle of a crowd where they were specifically asking him, "Will you abolish the police department in Portland?" And he was trying to give a sort of a political sort of wordy answer, but they cut him off and they said it's a yes or no question. Are you going to defund the police and abolish the police? And he said, "No, we're going to look at what we've got tomorrow." And so that took a lot of courage on his part. Now, moving out of your building because you've had all of these consecutive days of protests makes you a coward on your part, right? And so he needs to sort of split the difference, in my opinion, of what his actions are going to be. But no, I mean, my interpretation of what defund the police means is to ultimately abolish it. Now, again, I would be the first one to tell you that the responsibilities that are placed on police are far too much, right? So they are your marriage counselor, your psychologist, your psychiatrist. They are the person you call when, in certain areas, I'll speak to this in certain areas, they're the person that you call when your kids don't want to go to school. They for mental health disorders. So the police are called for so many different areas that they probably should not have purview over, right? You should be calling other
They don't
areas.
have the training for all of those areas. They don't have the adequate training. Yeah.
Right. And so if defund the police truly means we're not going to abolish police positions, we're not going to completely dismantle and abolish police forces in general, but we want to take budgetary authority that exists within the police department that's going to be unused, or budgetary authority that exists within a municipality that could otherwise be used somewhere else. And the net effect on police officers in that jurisdiction doesn't go down. The budgetary strength of them doesn't go down. But you say, look, you're not the counselor that we've asked you to be for 50 years. You're not the psychiatrist that we've asked you to be for 50 years. We want you to be law enforcement officers. And again, they're
specialize in law enforcement and nothing else.
Specialize in law enforcement, right? And so, but the problem is that they don't do that. And so there is some validity to defund the police, specifically when it comes to, take a lot of those burdens that are on the police department's plate, take it off of them.
I'm going to pin this and then speak about this real quick. So Anthony Trombley is a big fan of mine and friend of mine from Canada. So we have fans. By the way, if you're watching this, make sure you go on our YouTube page right now, the Jacob and Nelson Podcast. Like the YouTube page, subscribe to the YouTube page, and hit the notification bell. So that way, whenever we release this content, you're the first ones to see it. So Anthony said, training and being desensitized are two huge issues. I feel when it comes to the police, from my vantage point, I feel like they are not. It's a lose-lose situation. You're not properly trained for something you're being heavily scrutinized for, right?
Yep.
So there's a lot of a lot of times because the world we're living right now. Imagine doing a job under stress with the possibility of harm and death, and someone is taking a video of you, and you're being yelled at, and you're trying to restrain someone. That is a very, very stressful situation, and you have to do everything 100% right, because if you don't do it 100% right, you lose your job. Your life is in danger, and that's the stress that the police officer has been placed under that he's not properly trained for. I think I heard Jacko the Navy SEAL. For a Navy SEAL to go do what they do in another country, the kind of training they get to do a very specialized thing is very, very high level. And from my understanding, the police officer, for what he or she is asked to do, doesn't have even a third of the training that a Navy SEAL will get
Right.
to go do something that's very specialized. And I feel like they're not. It's a lose lose, and it's just slowly getting worse and worse and worse and worse. So my question now becomes: how do we address this? How do we
Well,
address
yeah,
this moving forward?
right. So the standards are incredibly low, unfortunately, right? Um,
Yeah.
the standards are low, and for police departments that are incredibly short-staffed and they need more officers on the streets as fast as they can, unfortunately, what's happening is they are lowering their standards
Mm.
for to what the qualifications would typically be to get basically butts in chairs to do a job where you cannot just put butts in chairs, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, um, but and then the continuing education that the police officers go through, there's something that's called in-service training that all police officers are required to do on, I believe it's an annual basis. At least in the state of Maryland, it's through the Maryland Police Training Commission. And it depends, I think, on which jurisdiction it is, but you know, in some of them, it's only 40 hours, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you go to this refresher course or whatever it is for 5 days. It's 8 hours. You sort of breeze through it. It's not complicated and it's not thought provoking and it's not difficult. And you sort of get the MPTC, Maryland Police Training Commission stamp of approval. You can be a law enforcement officer for another 12 months.
Oh wow.
Go on your way and patrol the streets, right? And so it's not good training. And so with that in mind, my perspective of it would be that the police department is probably not adequately funded from a training budget perspective, right? There's
Mm.
probably not enough funds in the budget to put the officers through the training that they absolutely have to have. And to your point about the scrutiny that they fall under, right, everybody's videotaping everything nowadays, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
body worn cameras for police officers is, I think it's a great thing. It's absolutely fine. But when you get individuals, so like the Jacob Blake incident, that happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, just
Mm-hmm.
a few weeks ago. Um, what when that happened, that was the video was released. It was about a 23-second clip of video that was released. No context of what took place prior to that incident was
Mm-hmm.
understood by the general public, and no context of what took place leading up to it or after it took place. It was a 23-second clip where Jacob Blake was gruesomely shot in
Mm-hmm.
his back 7 times by an officer, right?
Yeah.
And so, without any other information, without any other knowledge as to what was going on, why the police officers were there, what led to those particular circumstances, the immediate outcry of the public was that officer needs to be fired, charged criminally under the full extent of the law. He
Mm-hmm.
needs X, Y, and Z to have happen to him with
Yeah.
zero information as to what took place. And so there is a level of public scrutiny that is not fairly placed on law enforcement
So
because
can
go
I
ahead.
jump in there? That's
Yeah.
actually great because everything you just said right now is the black man's plight in America, and which has built this distrust. So there is no there is no context sometimes given to, and I'm not saying every black man has gone through this, but I'm saying historically speaking and systematically speaking, the black man has felt like my life does not matter. That's why we march for civil rights, not equal rights. And at a certain point, it felt like no one was listening to us. So now we have to play detective, we have to play jury. We get out our phones so that way we can record for ourselves, so we can, we can have our own evidence to give context to the senseless killings that have happened historically in black neighborhoods, and over time. So I'm saying that what the police is feeling right now with the scrutiny they've been under and things taken out of context is what the black man or woman has been saying for years. Like, hey, we're being killed out here. We've been scrutinized, and no one is listening to us. So I feel like, hopefully this is not the case. I feel like we might see a protest from the police saying enough is enough. We're not properly equipped to do what we do, and they'll be justified in doing that. Just like the circumstances that led to the Black Lives Matter movement, they were justified to do that. But I feel we still left with what is the solution to. I mean, it's not an easy answer, of course, but what is the solution so that way, A, the people who are protesting are properly heard, and B, the police who we need to police our neighborhoods and our businesses and our establishments, that they are properly trained to do what they need to do or specialize in what they need to do. Does that make sense?
Right. But so I get the historic frustration. Okay, I do. I get the
Do you?
historic frustration. Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I really do. But it doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't benefit the Black community at the end of the day to jump to conclusions about the actions that an officer took and post a 17-second video that doesn't show the entire story, and just to completely anathematize an officer without the full information.
True.
So let's look at Michael Brown.
Okay.
I'm sure you're familiar with the Michael Brown incident that took place in Ferguson, Missouri. The officer who shot Michael Brown endured 2 Obama administration DOJ investigations, 2 of them, thorough DOJ investigations that ultimately exonerated that officer for the actions that took place. But you hear these cries for no justice, no peace. So let's just play this out. A white officer shoots a black man and does have the justice system play out. Twice the justice system plays out, where the investigation reveals that the officer was justified in his actions, right?
Yeah.
Why isn't it okay for the no justice, no peace chance to say, we received justice. What happened to Michael Brown is probably tragic and could have been avoided, but it's not racist. It's not systemic police brutality. It's not. It's not any of those things.
Well,
so
it
why,
is.
But why is it?
Go ahead. Finish your statement.
Go ahead.
But it is, and that's why I said it's impossible for you to understand someone until you walk in someone else's shoes. You don't know why there's a passionate cry for justice, because in Michael Brown's case, maybe
but justice was played out
in this case, yes. But I'm saying the cry behind the movement is there have been several.
But he is still on that list of names that people say his name.
That's the name everyone has on their lips that they can use as a platform.
But it's not
right.
useful.
It's not right. I get it. But if, like Breonna Taylor, for example, say her name, right? She was wrongfully killed, right? And now she
was tragically killed, but I mean, she happened to be in her boyfriend's house when the police were executing a no-knock warrant that was signed by a judge, and her boyfriend opened fire on the police officers that entered her house, and she was caught in the crossfire. So she was tragically killed.
But why was there a settlement for her?
Well, because it was considered a wrongful death at the hands of police. But, that wasn't an overreach of police brutality. That was not an overreach of police power. They had a no-knock warrant signed by a judge.
True. But
the occupants of that house thought that there was an intruder coming in, so they opened fire. The police then rightfully fired back, and she was caught in the crosshairs. I mean, it's tragic, but it's
tragic.
But it's not white supremacist officers.
I'm not saying it's white supremacist officers, but I'm saying that there's a historical systemic racism that has systemically and historically oppressed the black man. Until you see that premise, you will not understand everything else that comes afterwards. So you see, go ahead.
this sounds like white fragility to me. Have you heard of that book, White
I've heard
Fragility,
of that. Yeah,
by Robin DiAngelo, where basically your whiteness is synonymous with your racism?
I disagree with
And
that.
but why can't we look at case by case incidents?
Hmm.
Why can't two things be true at one time?
I, I,
Why
I'm agreeing with you. I'm not
so
disagreeing with you.
right? So why can't two things be true at one time? Where we
Yeah.
say, yes, black people have historically been oppressed in our country.
It's
Check.
important to say that.
That is
Okay.
that's a true statement, and I am on the record. I think you have heard me say it. Yes,
Hmm.
I'm 100% on the record. They've been
Yeah.
oppressed in our country.
Hmm.
No questions asked.
Yep.
There have been black people who have been wrongfully killed at the hands of police, unarmed and otherwise. Check.
A
That's absolutely
significant amount of black people over time. Okay.
over time.
Check.
The Michael Brown case was not one of those instances,
Yes.
as cleared by the Department of Justice. And so
That,
I guess that's my only point that I'm trying to make, is that it doesn't do the Black Lives Matter movement any good to lump his name into a category of systemic police brutality and racism. That's all I'm saying.
so if what you're saying is actuality is factual with regards to the Michael Brown situation and the law served its purpose, I'm saying to you again that if you truly understand the premise of systemic oppression and racism in this country and how it's led to a significant amount of black men imprisoned and a significant amount of black children starting behind the starting line, and how that has played its part in how
And that's a big problem
it's
that
really big.
I 100% agree with.
Yes.
I
So,
100% agree with that premise.
okay, good. Until you understand that premise and how it's developed a distrust and sometimes even a hate of the people who are supposed to protect and serve, right? If until you understand how that premise plays into that mindset, you will not understand how people might jump on a movement that is not based on facts, i.e., the Michael Brown situation, right? They might jump at that movement just so they can get their voices heard. It's the same thing like with the looting and destruction of property. It's not cool to loot and
Okay.
destroy property, but if I'm protesting and you're not hearing what I'm saying, I'm protesting. There's bound to be a few people within that protest that
Yep.
will take even extreme action so that way you can hear my voice. It's a symptom of the oppressed.
Okay. So I think I understand what you're saying, and I think I can sum it up in one word. So so well, I can't sum it up in one word because I'm not.
I was waiting for the one word.
Well, there is one word that sums it up, I think. Are you familiar with the term neuroplasticity?
Yes.
I think it's a neuroplasticity problem.
Expand for those who are watching.
So I'll define it. I mean, neuroplasticity is basically it's a reorganization of synapses and synaptic connections within your brain through experiences or learned behavior over time. Fair definition? Right? So your brain has synapses and they rewire over time. And so
New behavior.
new behavior. And so because of perpetual behavior that has occurred over time, there has been rewirings in the brain where
That is still occurring right now, by the way. But
that is still occurring, right? Exactly.
yeah.
And so I think it's a neuroplasticity issue. And
Okay.
I understand. No, you don't agree?
I'm still trying to process. That's really ambitious to break it down to that. I'm still trying to
But
process that.
So I guess it's just you're saying that the black community has a hard time looking at Michael Brown in an isolated incident because of
No,
his.
I'm not saying I don't know the facts of the Michael Brown incident.
No. But let's just say everything
people,
everything that I said about Michael Brown was true, right?
Okay.
And people can fact check me if they want. I'm pretty confident.
Which they're doing right now in the comment section.
Please do. I'm
Okay.
fairly confident that Michael Brown's incident, the officer that was involved, there were 2 DOJ investigations that ultimately cleared him. Right.
Okay.
Again, so
I'll take your word for it.
Let's say, for sake of argument, that that's true. And so you're saying that because of the years and years and years of oppressive behavior that the black community has felt in our country, they have a harder time looking at the facts of the Michael Brown case
No,
and saying,
that's what I'm saying. I'm not
okay,
saying they have a harder time looking at the facts of that case. I'm saying that any kind of case that resembles what we're currently experiencing or what we've experienced in the past, right, is it trends. We jump on the movement because it's just one more step towards justice for us. Now it's easy for the groups that have not been oppressed or are not being oppressed to say, no, 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 let's check out the facts case by case. Then you will have to go back in history and say, well, why weren't the facts checked case by case for every black man that was shot unjustly? Why weren't the facts checked for every group of black people that didn't have access to resources like the general public?
Because we're a species that is flawed. We are
True.
constantly learning. We are
True.
constantly evolving. Why was it that in the year 1920 we thought it was perfectly fine for women not to vote? We said,
That's a good
yeah.
point.
And it was actually considered prior to the 1920s. We thought if somebody would have said pre 1920, and again, this it took place prior to the 1920s, but the suffrage movement, I think, actually officially started in the 1920s, but it was late 1800s, right? But our country's been around a lot longer than that. And so in the 1850s, if you and I are sitting around having a conversation, and I say to you, I think it would be a good idea if my sister could vote. You'd laugh at me. You'd think I'm ridiculous, right? You think that's an absolutely absurd claim. Why would women have the right to vote? That's not their place. That's not what they do. And so all I'm saying is that in order for us to upgrade and evolve and constantly get better and better and better as a species is to look at incidents like that. Look at the facts of the case and say, okay, that was not racist. That was not police brutality. Now and I still think that the neuroplasticity argument does make sense because over time,
I have to digest that one and think about it a couple of days.
I'm not just trying to reduce it to neuroscience, but it's definitely something that I think makes sense. And I'm not trying to minimize it by just saying, well, it's neuroplasticity and you have to get over it at some point, right? I think understanding that it's a rewiring of the synapses in your brain.
Yeah.
I think having that knowledge is to say, okay, we get why all of those names get lumped into one big giant bucket, and then from there the dominoes fall.
Well, I'm not saying that's the case with Michael Brown. I'm just saying again that you cannot minimize the impact of history. It's impossible. And I know you're not. I'm saying,
I hope that in no way that's what I've done.
And for everyone watching right now, we're just two dudes who are talking about something that we hope to shed some light on to progress us forward. That's all we're doing. I know Jacob very well. He knows me very well. And that's the whole purpose of this conversation. But going back to what I was saying, impact of history, impact of present, lack of a better phrase, present history is informing how people are reacting. I choose to not react. I choose to respond, to check out the facts and respond. But you cannot, as a group, diminish the idea that people sometimes react because they're still living in a hell today. And the hell they're living today was a result of an oppression in their not too recent history. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So when you have a case, and now I don't know the details of Michael Brown, and people are on our comments right now talking about that, but I might pin some of the comments in a second. But with regards to Michael Brown, for example, there are, for the one Michael Brown that you say was the law did its job and exonerated the police officer, if everything you said was factual, there is probably 100, 200 Michael Browns that the law did not do justice for. And we can't jump on their backs to create a movement to get our voices, their cases heard. So, well, what else do we have to jump on? Oh, wait, this is a nationally televised case that we can use as a platform to get our voices heard. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I'm saying to diminish the idea that that's how sometimes you have to go about protesting to get your voices heard. It's a symptom of an oppressed people when they jump on the trends to help their voices be heard. That's all I'm saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
No, I
in
get
a,
it. And
and I agree with you. Like we should look at the case facts. It's almost like, say, for example, if there was a pedophile, I have kids. There was a pedophile that lived in the neighborhood, and I have kids running around my neighborhood, and the police got the pedophile, and he served his time in prison. But then he came back to the neighborhood and was living two doors down. I'm going to be very, very aware of that pedophile's movement the whole time he's
ab-
there.
absolutely. And yeah, and I'm not trying to be unsympathetic
Yeah.
to the history. And well, let's look at some of the comments because I'm sure I've absolutely been. I'm
Oh.
sure I've been slaughtered.
No,
And
no,
it's
you're not being slaughtered. You're not being slaughtered. I think. Um, so let me see. Let me start from here. Anthony said, with regards to the desensitizing comment, problem there is in communities of a higher crime rate. It's a proportion of those community residents, but all citizens then get lumped and treated the same by the police. I agree with that. When theoretically they should approach on a per person basis, which they're not properly trained and equipped for. Um, Everyone's situation is different and needs to be approached with that in mind. Okay, so here's a question for you, Jacob, and I'll let you address this. Our plan was to go for 45 minutes today, but that's not going to happen. Uh, but I think this is a conversation that needs to be had. So this one's for you. Do you believe that? And second question was, but they were the wrong house. This is for Breonna Taylor. And Felix said, Michael Brown did not get justice. The police unions helped policemen not to be charged.
that's the job of the police unions. I mean, that is by definition their job. Their job is to represent their police officers. That's how unions function. So
Is that an implicit bias to represent the people that work under you?
what's that?
Would there be an implicit bias for the police union to exonerate one of their own?
Well, no. I don't think it's that, but it's just they are by being a member of the Fraternal Order of Police, you are entitled to certain legal representations. And so the Fraternal Order of Police is the police union, and by paying your dues to be a part of that union, one of
Oh,
the
I
rights
see.
that's imbued upon you is to have representation in instances where legal representation is required.
Oh, it makes sense. So I think you answered that question. They were just his representation, and it's their job to exonerate their client
Right. It would be the same
as a
thing
lawyer.
as so for them to no for but for that comment specifically to say, well, the police unions got him off would be the same way of saying that I hired a defense attorney and the defense attorney evaluated the facts of the case and got me off.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
It's akin to that.
makes sense. I think this is much better when we have actual people watching and commenting live so we can see the comments real time. Mario, Jacob, please explain to us again why you believe Michael Brown. I don't know if you can explain that. I don't know if it's fair for you to explain that, but if you want to take a crack at it, it's up to you.
Yeah, I don't know why he was again, I did not look at
You were
all
not
the
there.
I wasn't there, and so, but
Yeah.
my understanding, the shortest, most succinct version of that story was, um, he had recently committed, I believe, a robbery at a convenience store, and he was identified. There was a struggle for the officer's gun that had taken place, and the hashtag essentially that came up from the Michael Brown incident was hashtag hands up, don't shoot. And basically after eyewitnesses and the DOJ investigation later took place, that was not actually what took place. There was a physical altercation that took place with the officer where Michael Brown was trying to get his gun. And again,
Mm.
I would I am certainly not speaking somebody with firsthand expert knowledge of this, but
Mm.
I have read relatively extensively about this now that it was several years ago at this point. But that is, at least to my knowledge, what took place is that there was an altercation. Michael Brown did try to get the officer's weapon. That there wasn't that hands up, don't shoot moment that ultimately took place. That was deemed to be false, and the officer felt that he had to use deadly force. And again, if I haven't said it already, which I know that I have, that case is tragic. It is an absolute tragedy that happened. But I don't know that that necessarily fits under the guise of police racist brutality.
I think this conversation today was amazing for our topic, which is the power of perspective. I think the more we can have different perspectives, clashing, conversing, mingling, the the closer we can come to some kind of a better understanding for how we should move forward as a society. I feel. I'm actually glad that you and I see this from maybe two vantage points. I believe you and I undoubtedly believe in the human worth of a human being. So when someone dies or is killed by the police, or police is killed by someone, we're not saying, oh, just push that aside. We're saying the human life is worth something. But at the same time, what I believe you were saying, Jacob, to kind of summarize what you're saying is it's it does harm to a movement, and correct me if I'm wrong, it does harm to a movement if the platform and the messaging for that movement is based off a case that was deemed to be, in case of Michael Brown, for example, was deemed to be, there was no wrongdoing on the police officer's end, right?
I'm not even saying that there was no wrongdoing on the police officer's end.
Okay.
A justified shooting doesn't necessarily mean that there was no wrongdoing, I guess I would say. I mean, because again,
Okay.
the decision to take somebody's life as a police officer is a decision that fortunately I have never been I've never been faced with that decision. I can't imagine how I would react if I had to be faced with that decision. And so all I'm saying is that we can break all of those instances down at the microsecond level and frame by frame by frame in absolute slow-mo, Monday morning quarterback what took place, and absolutely scrutinize the officers involved in a lot of instances. All I'm saying is that, again, for no justice, no peace, if we're referring to the criminal justice system, the criminal justice system played its course twice. And there are other instances of reprehensible actions on the parts of police officers that have taken place in the African American community that I think could better properly be cited. That's all. And again,
Well said.
I fully expected to be absolutely crushed on the comments. And,
No, I think,
but I hope at least for at least you and me, where I'm coming from. And again, I don't want to say, I don't want to be dismissive of the comments, because I do appreciate the comments, and I think that the comments are good for keeping the conversation going. But again, I would be remiss if I did not put it flatly and specifically on record to say that, I am.
you don't have to do that. I know what you're trying to do right now. You don't have to do that. I think the reason why we are doing this, the premise from the beginning, was to have these kinds of conversations, and I will be doing many more podcasts with you, and there'll be some times when I'll be getting all the questions. Nelson, I can't believe blah, Nelson, blah, blah. I'm like, cool. It's what I think. This is my vantage point, and it's okay to have my perspective, and it's okay to converse from my perspective, but it's not okay to be so rigid where I'm not open to listening in a civil way to another person's perspective. So, like my boy Felix said, good conversation. I really enjoy this. You know what? Maybe this might be a good one to come back to maybe sometime next week, or we can move on to something else. But we will be doing this every week. That is the plan. God help us. So help us.
Plan.
That's the plan. And but please, if you haven't done so already, do me a couple of things. Do me 3 things. All right. Actually, I like 4 things. Do us a couple of things. Do one. Make sure you like this post right now and share this post right now. 2, go and follow us on all our social media platforms. You can see the little ticker right there. Jacob and Nelson Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram. Follow us And 4, I think, was it 3 or 4? 3, go on YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube page and hit the notification button so that way, whenever we drop new content, you can be the first ones to see that. Jacob, if you don't mind, before I leave, I will let you close us out, and I will highlight 2 more comments, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and then you can close us out. I will highlight this first one, speak to it, and then I'll highlight the last one. There we go.
So I don't know what she's saying is not true. That's why I asked you that question.
Breonna Taylor.
So if I've made this, I feel like I've made this distinction very clear too. I have an open mind, 100%. And if anything that I have said is proved to be not factual and wrong about whatever the cases were, I lost your video, Nelson. There you go. Then I will come back and clarify those statements 100%. So I have 100% an open mind. We need to treat and feel for each other the way we would want to be treated. Don't just say love and not show it towards everyone. I don't know that that's a fair criticism of me, because I don't know that I've been dismissive of any instance, but
I don't think so either. I think can I jump in? Can I piggyback off what you're saying?
yeah.
Oh, I'm actually glad that people are engaging with our content, and I'm glad you were brave to speak your point of view, because what my friend Felix said here is actually what I feel. We're not about crushing each other, but educating for a better world. So I have to go do my research to figure out what happened with Breonna Taylor and Michael Brown. I just kind of know what I know from what I've watched in the news, and I think that's what most people know. For the most part, they just kind of watch the news and not really research for themselves. But I have to do my research before I speak on these things moving forward. And I think you have. It sounds like you've done your research and you've actually studied the cases and the little nuances of the cases. And this fly is annoying the crap out of me. And pin this last one. Much love to you and your family. Stay safe, all the way from Canada. But yeah,
There you go.
so let's wrap it up, bro.
That's probably a good way to end it right there.
Yeah, let me put that back up. Much love to you and your families. Thank you all so much for engaging in this content. Like Jacob and I said, we'll be back next week. We'll let you know when we'll be back next week. Please, thank you so much for your engaging. And like we said, this is about 2 dudes, 2 perspectives on 1 podcast. We're just trying to do our part for a better world. All right. With that, Jacob, I will see you next time.
See ya.
All right.